The following day, as a result of what is considered an extensive instance, Ryu persuaded the prefect's office to appoint the health commission. It's true that people are starting to worry, Richard agreed, and gossip exaggerates everything. The prefect told me, let's act quickly if you like, but keep quiet about it. Anyways, he was sure that it's a false alarm. Bernard Ryu took Castell in his car when he went to the prefecture. Do you know, Castell said, that the departmente has no serum? I know. I phoned the warehouse, and the manager was flabbergasted. It has to be brought from Paris. I hope it won't take long. I've already sent a telegram, Ryu replied. The prefect was pleasant, but nervous. Let's get started, gentlemen, he said. Do I have to summarize the situation? Richard thought that there was no need. The doctors knew the situation already. The question was merely to decide on a proper course of action. The question, old Castell said bluntly, is to decide whether we are dealing with the plague or not. 2 or 3 doctors protested, while the others apparently hesitated. As for the prefect, he leapt up from his seat and automatically turned towards the door, as though checking that it had already prevented this enormity from spreading down the corridor. Richard announced that in his opinion they should not give way to panic. All they could say for certain was that the infection was an integral compilation and that it was dangerous. In science, as in life, to jump to conclusions. Old Castell, who had calmly chewing on his yellow mustache, turned his clear eyes towards Ryu. When he looked benevolently over the rest of the company, announced that he knew very well it was plague, but that of course that if they were to acknowledge the fact officially, they would have to take stern measures. He knew that underneath this was what held his colleagues back from the results, not to upset them, but was quite willing to state that it was not plague. The prefect got annoyed and said that in any event it was not a sensible approach. The important thing, Castell said, is that it is not whether to approach is sensible, but whether it gets us thinking. As Ryu had said nothing, they asked his opinion. It's an infection similar to typhoid, but with swelling of the lymph nodes and vomiting. I lanced some of the bullous in the way I was able to have the analysis made in the laboratory thinks I can detect the plague bacillus. However, to be precise, we must say that for certain specific modifications that the microbe does not include the classic description of plague. Richard emphasized that this meant that they should not rush judgments, that they would at least have to wait for the statistical results of the series of analysis which had begun a few days earlier. When a microbe, Ryu said, after a brief silence, is capable of increasing the size of the spleen 4 times in 3 days, and making the vegetative gland the size of an orange and the conciry of the porch, it is precisely when we should rush to do something, and sources of the infection are multiplying. At this rate, if the disease does not halt, it could kill half the town within the next 2 months. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether you call it plague or growing pains. All that matters says that we stop it from killing half the town. Richard felt that they should not paint too black a picture, and in any case there was no proof of the contagion, since the relatives of his patients were all unaffiliated, but others have died, Ryu pointed out. And of course, contagion is never absolute, because if they were, we should have endless exponential growth and deviating loss of population. It's not a matter of painting a black picture, it's a matter of taking precautions. However, Richard thought that he could sum up the situation by saying that if they were to halt the disease, assuming that it did not stop of its own accord, they'd have to apply serious preventative health measures, providing for the in-law that to do so they would have to acknowledge officially that there was an outbreak of plague, that they had no absolute certainty on that source, and consequently that they had no considered the matter. The question, Ryu insisted, is not knowing whether the measures provided under the law are serious, but if the necessary to prevent half the town from being killed. The rest of the matter of assumptions, and that the precisely in order to settle the question of the states give us the prefect. Naturally, said the prefect, but I need you to acknowledge officially that we do have an outbreak of plague. If we don't acknowledge it, Ryu said, it still threatens to kill half the population in the town. Richard interrupted nervously. The truth is, our colleagues here believe in the plague. His description of the symptoms proved that. Ryu replied that he had did not describe a symptom, that he had described what he had seen. And what he had seen was glandular stains and delirious fevers, providing fatally within 48 hours. Was Dr. Richard prepared to take the responsibility for stating the epidemic would stop without strict preventative measures? Richard hesitated and looked at Ryu. Sincerely tell me what you think. Are you certain that it's plague? You are asking the wrong question. It's not a matter of vocabulary, it's a matter of time. Your opinion, then, said the prefect. Is that even if this is not plague, that the preventive health measures that would be appropriate for the event of plague ought not be less than applied? If I really must have an opinion, then that is it. The doctor consulted one another, and eventually Richard said, so do we take the responsibility of acting on those with the disease for a plague? The former words were warmly applauded. So that is also what I think, my dear colleagues, Richard asked. I don't mind the form of words, Ryu said. Let's just say that we should not act as though half the town were not threatened by death, because that would be. In the midst of the general annoyance, Ryu left. For a few moments later, with a strobe smelling of fried oil and urine, the woman screaming to death and her groin covered in blood was turning her face to him. The day after the conference, the infection made another small advance, and even entered the newspapers, but under a harmless guise, since the merely made a few allusions to it. The day after Ryu could read some of the little white posters the prefect had rapidly stuck up in the least observant corners of the town. From this, the poster was hard to reach, and the conclusion was the authorities were confronting the situation. The measures were far from dironic, and it appeared that a good deal had been done to avoid upsetting the public opinion. The preamble to decease announced the few cases of precocious fever had been detected in the common of Ora. Though it is not yet possible to say whether it is contagious, these cases are not specific enough to really be disturbing. There is no doubt that the population would remain calm. Nonetheless, for reasons of caution everyone could understand, the prefect had taken some preventative measures. If they were interrupted or applied in any proper way, the measures were such that they would put a definite stop to the threat of the epidemic. As the result, the prefect did not for a moment doubt the citizens under his charge would cooperate with the zealous manner with what he was doing. After that, the posters announced some general measures, among them scientific program of rodent control by injecting toxic gas into the sewers, and strict supervision of the water supply. It advised that inhabitants who observe the most rigorous hygiene are finally invited anyone infested with fleas to attend the myacral dispensary. In addition, it was obligatory for families to declare any cases of diagnosis by the doctor, and agreed to isolation the patients in special wards in the hospital. Those wards were suitably equipped with treat patients in the least amount of time with the greatest possibility of cure. A few additional preventions made it obligatory to disinfect the patient's room and the vehicles in which he or she was carried. And finally, the relatives were simply advised to undergo health tests. Dr. Ryu turned sharply away from the notice and set off towards his surgery. Joseph Grahn, who was waiting for him, once again raised his arm when he saw him. Yes, said Ryu, I know, the figures are rising. The day before, around 10 patrons had died in the town. The doctor told Gran he might see him that evening since he was going to visit Kotar. Good idea, said Gran. You'll do him good. I think he has changed. In what way? He's become polite. Wasn't he before? Gran hesitated. He couldn't say that Kotar was impolite. That wouldn't be correct. He was reserved, a silent man, a bit like a wild boar. His room, his plain restaurant, some rather mysterious outings. That was the whole of Kotar's life. Officially, he was a salesman in wine and spirits. Occasionally, he would have to visit from 2 or 3 men who must be his customers. Sometimes, in the evening, he would go to the cinema, which was the opposite of his house. The clerk had noticed that Kotar seemed to prefer gangster films. In any event, the salesman was solitary and suspicious. According to Gran, all of this had changed. I don't know how to put it, but I have an impression, you see, that he is trying to get on the right side of people, that he wants to have everyone supporting him. He often talks to me and invites me to go out with him, and I'm not always able to refuse. In any case, he interests me, and then after that, I did to save his life. Since his suicide attempt, Kotar had not had any more visits. In the streets, in his shops, he appeared to be sympathy. No one had ever spoken kindly to grocers or shown such interest in listening to the Topacanist. The Topacanist, Gran added. She's a real snake. I said I'm much to Kotar, but what he told me was that I was wrong, and that she's good qualities if you knew where to look for them. 2 or 3 times Kotar had also taken Gran into expensive restaurants or cafes in town. In fact, he started to visit these places regularly. It's nice there, he would say, and then you're in good company. Gran had noticed that the staff were practically attentive to the salesman and understood why he saw the huge tips Kotar left. Seemed particularly appreciative with the attention he got in return. One day at the Matarde Hotel, he had seen him to the door and helped me put on his overcoat. Kotar said to Gran, He's a good lad. He won't testify. Testify to what? Kotar hesitated. Well, that I'm not a bad person. Apart from that, he had sudden moods. One day he was at the grocery and appeared less friendly. He returned home to quite disproportionate fits of anger. He's going over there to the others, the toads, he said over and over again. What others? All of them. Gran had even witnessed the curious scene of the tobacconist. In the middle of the heated conversation, she was spoken at the recent arrest that had caused the stir in Algerius, and it involved a young company employee who had been killed in Arab on the beach. If you put all this scum in prison, the tobacconist said, the respectable people could sleep easy. But she stopped when she saw Kotar suddenly become very agitated and rush out of her shop without a word or apology. Gran and the woman were left with their arms dangling, watching him vanish. After that, Gran would point out that Ryu had other changes in Kotar's personality. Kotar had always held his liberty opinion his favorite remark. Big fish always eat little ones. Prove that. But recently he had only been buying the most conservative papers in Iran, and the ones he could not help feeling were quite deliberate to read in the public places. Similarly, a few days after getting up, he asked Gran, who was going to the post office, and to be kind enough to dispatch the postal order for 100 francs to be sent every month to a sister living somewhere far away. But just as Gran was leaving, Kotar said, Send her 200 francs. It will be a nice surprise to her. She imagines I never think about her, but the truth is I'm very fond of her. Finally, he had his own conversation with Gran. Kotar was very intricate in his work. When it was the occupied Gran every evening, he made Gran answer the questions about it. So, Kotar said, you're writing a book? If you'd like, it's more complicated than that. Oh, Kotar explained, I wish I could do something like that. Gran seemed surprised at Kotar's stammering and out that being an artist must make a lot of things easier. Why? Grant said. Well, because an artist has the more right than other people, and everyone knows he can get away with lots of things. Oh, come now, Ryu told Grant the day at the posters. This business of the rats has gone to your head, as it has many other people, that's all. Or else he's afraid of infection. Grant replied, I don't think so, Doctor. And if you want my opinion, the rodent control loitery went past beneath the windows with a loud noise of exhaust. Ryu did not reply until he got some hope of being heard casually against the clerk for his opinion. Grant gave him a serious look. He's a man, he said, who has something to be concise. The doctor shrugged his shoulders, as did the police commissioner, and the other fish to fry. Of course, that afternoon Ryu had a meeting with Castell, and the serum had not arrived. As for that, Ryu said, would it be any use? The basilics are very old. Oh no, said Castell, I don't agree. Those little brutes always look different from one another, but underneath they're all the same. So you think anyways. In reality, we don't know a thing about it. Of course not. We suppose we don't. But at the same time, everyone throughout the day, the doctors felt growing inside the slightest sense of dizziness whenever he thought about the plague. Eventually he admitted he was afraid. Twice he went into the coward cafes, like Kotar, and felt the need for human warmth. Ryu thought it was to leave him, but didn't help him remind the promise to visit the Salmons. The evening, the doctor found Kotar standing in the dining room table. When Ryu came in, he opened the detective novel in front of him, but it was already quite late in the afternoon and would have been hard to read in the gathering darkness. Rather than a minute later, Kotar must have been meddling with the half-light. Ryu asked how he was. Kotar sat down and growled that he was well, but he would be better still if he could be sure that no one was taking interest in him. Ryu pointed out that no one could always be alone. It's not that. I'm talking about people who are interested in causing you trouble. Ryu said nothing. Mind you, this is not my situation, but I'm reading a novel. Here is an unfortunate man who gets arrested suddenly one morning. People are taking an interest in him, and he knew nothing about it. They were talking about him in offices, writing his name in index cards. Do you think that's fair? Do you think anyone has the right to do that to a man? That depends, Ryu said. Of course, in one sense, no one has the right, but that is, by the way, you should stop copying up for too long. You ought to go out.